Natasha,
Debbie,
show.
the show.
Welcome to it. Just two patriotic girls.
Learning about the world.
So please, don't take us the wrong way. So I don't know if I've ever actually said this on here, but while we were doing this channel, Ancestry.com, if you've ever done that with your DNA, it updates things, and it started off with, the basic stuff. And then it changed mine to a really ridiculously high amount of Scottish ancestry. I've never heard that I had Scottish ancestry by any of my family members. So it was crazy cool to learn that while doing this channel and this show with you guys. And I'm really, really, really excited about today's video for that exact reason.
That's right. You do have some Scottish ancestry. I don't have any. And I don't know about you, but I really don't know much about the history of Scotland, how it was formed and all the fun stuff.
I really don't either. Now, this is a new video. It's only been out for a couple months. So some people may think, oh, I've seen this. You haven't. You probably haven't. I know there's another video that's been flying around the YouTube, channels and things like that. This is not the one. This is a newer one. It has a lot of views on it, a lot of likes and stuff. So we saw this pop up. We're like, yes, let's learn about, some of my ancestors.
That's right.
Land. And I'm really, really happy about this. So I hope you're excited with us to join us to learn this. I bet a lot of you already know a good amount of this, but I wonder if there's something in here you don't know, something you might learn that could be new or a different approach to it. But I'm just really excited. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who has been so cool to help us with learning about all this.
One of the big parts of getting older is you learn to appreciate the history and you actually want to learn it and know it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I just don't appreciate it that much as a child. So we're going to take a look at the history of Scotland. And I couldn't be more excited to check out my peoples.
Let's go.
It's like I'm about to watch a really cool movie.
Scotland is a country within the nation-state of the United Kingdom, being the most northerly part of the island of Great Britain. It is comprised essentially of three parts: an archipelago, highlands and lowlands. It has a rich history and culture, quite distinct from that of its southern English neighbour, and such is the depth of this distinction that I chose to cover this country in a separate set of videos, despite Scotland not being a nation-state per se. I do use the word country correctly, however, as Scotland is one of the 4 countries of the United Kingdom and is the legal term used to describe these subdivisions of the greater nation-state. In this, the first of a 2-part presentation, I'll look at Scotland's long history up to the present. In part 2, I'll examine its physical and human geography, its national organisation and state structure and symbols, and lastly its economy and culture. The word Scotland means land of the Scots, which is simple enough, but the word Scot has a more complex history. Scoti was the name given to the Gaels, or Gallic people that inhabited today's Scotland and Ireland by the Romans. But in Old English the word Scotland came to mean Ireland, it still being inhabited by the Gaels. By the 11th century, however, this usage had switched to the land of the Gaels within today's Scotland, with the Gaelic transformation of that country in the preceding centuries. The Gaels themselves call their land Alba, and Albany, Albion and Albania were also used to describe these lands during the Middle Ages.
Didn't know that.
The Romans referred to the tribes north of the River Forth as the Caledones, and Caledonia has gone on to be used as a romantic alternative name for Scotland since then. People have lived in Scotland since the end of the last ice age. With the retreat of the ice sheet that covered these lands up until about 13,000 years ago, hunter-gatherers moved into the area. We know that the Orkney Islands, just north of the mainland, were occupied in the Neolithic period before 2500 BC, since there are the ruins of a settlement from this period found here at Skara Brae, older than Stonehenge, and older than the pyramids.
Okay.
Now, I would like to take a closer look at the islands there. I think it would be very interesting.
Oh, I agree. But before we do that, I'm just going to look at this minute. Y'all know I'm not impressed by Stonehenge. I don't like all the rocks.
But this is a little bit more impressive.
I want to see these.
Yes.
I really do.
It's like a cavern.
That's just neat.
And a little underground
older.
house.
So much older. Why has no one ever mentioned these to us? We've never heard about this.
No. So the Orkney Islands, we need to see if we can find something on that.
Absolutely. Beautiful.
It's absolutely stunning.
It really is.
Skara Brae, older than Stonehenge and older than the pyramids. Other Neolithic sites are found dotted across the northern and western isles, and so many are so well preserved because they were built from durable stone instead of perishable wood due to the lack of trees. More on that subject in the geography section.
Oh.
At some point prior to 500 BC, Celtic peoples were either already present or migrated into the north of Great Britain Island. Until quite recently, it was accepted that Celts originated in Central Europe during the Bronze Age and migrated outwards to occupy the British Isles, the area of modern-day France, or Gaul as it was known then, much of the Iberian Peninsula, and even parts of modern-day Turkey.
Really?
Wow.
But a new theory suggests that the Celts actually originated along the Atlantic coast of the British Isles. This controversy of Celtic origin has yet to be resolved.
Yeah, will it ever?
Regardless, the Celts became the dominant peoples in the British Isles prior to the Roman invasion, and their languages have survived today in the form of Breton, Cornish, Welsh, Irish Gaelic, and Scots Gaelic.
We learned this in that languages video.
It is the Celts that give Scotland its culture that is distinct from English.
Okay.
While the Romans invaded and successfully held England for centuries, they were unable to subdue Scotland due to a combination of the fierceness of the Scottish tribes, the mountainous terrain, and the very un-Roman-like climate. The Emperor Hadrian erected a stone wall and series of forts between the Tyne and Solway rivers in the early 2nd century to protect the settled province to the south from raiders, while the Antonine Wall, erected by his successor, was built from turf and extended from the Clyde to the Forth rivers.
Okay.
We hadn't heard about that one.
No.
Hold up. What?
So,
okay.
Basically, created a valley or a hill.
When we did Hadrian's Wall just recently, no one mentioned this one.
No.
I don't think. I mean, there could have been a comment or two we missed, but okay. This is fascinating. Let's rewind that just 5 seconds.
Was built from turf and extended from the Clyde to the Forth rivers.
Huh.
This was the furthest north the Romans ever attempted to reach anywhere in their empire in terms of a stable administration, but the wall was abandoned only a decade after its completion, with the Romans retreating to Hadrian's Wall, which was maintained for centuries until the empire's collapse in the 5th century.
5th, that's crazy.
Britain was left to fend for itself in the following centuries. Much of what happened at that time is still debatable due to a lack of written records, but what we do know is that today's England and eventually southeastern Scotland became occupied by the Anglo-Saxons, a Germanic people, while the rest of Scotland remained dominated by Celtic tribes. The western coast was ruled by Celtic Gaels that came over from Ireland, while all other parts came under the general banner of the Picts. Who the Picts were is still not fully understood, and while we know through their artwork and other evidence that they were certainly Celtic, their language has not survived. The advance of the Irish Gaelic language, either through conquest or missionary work by Gaelic priests spreading the Christian religion, led to its extinction and the firm establishment of Gaelic as the language of Scotland by the 11th century. Meanwhile, the Anglo-Saxons, in the form of the Kingdom of Northumbria, had pushed north as far as present-day Edinburgh.
Oh, really?
To further muddy the murky historical waters of this period, the Vikings arrived in Scotland in the 8th century, initially as raiders, but later to settle, taking all of the northern and western isles for varying degrees of time. Notably, Orkney and Shetland remained in Norse hands until as late as 1472. It is understood that the threat of the Vikings enabled the uniting of many of the Pictish and Gaelic kingdoms under a single king, Kenneth MacAlpin, in the 9th century, and encompassed much of the country, and whose lineage all later kings of Scotland would claim.
Oh, really? Really?
Under this kingdom, increased organisation and centralisation led to improvements in agriculture and the formation of the first towns.
Interesting.
It was known to the Gaels as Alba, but in Church Latin it was referred to as Scotia, and in English as the Kingdom of Scotland. With the Norman conquest of England in 1066, a mix of English and French influence permeated northwards into Scotland over the next 2 centuries via the Scottish royal court through a combination of intermarriage, dependencies upon, and threats made by the Norman kings to the south. This influence spread through the boroughs, or towns, where Middle English, itself a mix of Old English and French, became increasingly spoken among the urban populations in a heavily dialected form which comes to us today as the Scots language.
I just want to be able to look at that for a second. It's hard for me to listen and read at the same time. It's a lot.
It is.
So the red here is the Old English by the beginning of the 9th century, northern portion of Northumbria. That was surprising to hear that. And then orange, early Scots by the beginning of the 15th century. What's the yellow? Modern Scots by the mid-20th century. Okay, interesting. How that breaks apart kind of.
And the blue is the Gaelic languages.
Historical areas of usage. Historical areas. Okay. And the Orkney Islands and the Shetland Islands are all in the modern Scots. Okay. Okay. I think this is fascinating so far, and I'm learning a lot.
It is. It's a lot to go through.
Kenneth MacAlpin. Why have I not heard of him if all the other Scottish... Wow. Surprise.
In a heavily dialected form which comes to us today as the Scots language. Gaelic was still spoken by the vast majority, however, who still lived off the land outside the boroughs.
Okay. So
the largest of these boroughs is the most famous today, the borough that became the capital of the Scottish nation as early as the 14th century, Edinburgh. This meddling of the Anglo-Normans in Scottish affairs reached its climax under the reign of the English king, Edward I, Longshanks. When the Scottish king Alexander III died without an heir in 1286, Edward seized the opportunity to arbitrate between the various Scottish nobles over their claims to succeed the crown.
Okay.
In return for surrendering nominal Scottish independence to England, the Scottish noble John Balliol was given the kingship, but later he and other nobles refused to fight in England's wars against France. Balliol was deposed by Edward, who then took over direct control of Scotland. Thus began the Wars of Scottish Independence, with William Wallace emerging as one of the chief resistance leaders.
Okay, now we're getting to some stuff I kind of know.
Robert the Bruce was crowned King of Scotland in 1306, and his victory over the English at Bannockburn in 1314 is among the most famous of all battles in both English and Scottish history, and cemented Scottish independence. The border country between the two nations became a somewhat lawless place in the succeeding centuries, with raids being carried out by reivers from both sides, sometimes encouraged by their respective governments, other times by just opportunistic locals. Scotland itself progressed in terms of development during the late Middle Ages, with the towns becoming increasingly prosperous, but with an increasing divide in terms of the way of life, culture and subsequent animosity between Highlands and Lowlands. The Highlanders would often refer to the Lowlanders as Sassenachs, a Gaelic loanword for Saxons, implying that the Scots-speaking Lowlanders were just some type of Englishmen. Meanwhile, the urban Lowlanders would look down upon the Highlanders as uncouth savages, and the label Tuchtr emerged at some point as a pejorative term for such.
I have not heard that word.
The Highlanders had the clan system, whereby families within a certain area would swear loyalty to one another or sometimes a clan chief.
Okay.
This system of loyalty had a large effect upon the politics of Scotland and the behaviour of the Highlanders toward each other, the Lowlanders, and ultimately with the English centuries later, with tragic results, as we shall later see.
I just wanted to quickly say that I know from ancestry, both my parents have a Scottish ancestry in their DNA, which is cool. But I don't know what family member, which family members on either side are those people? I don't know. And I've tried to look it up the best I can, and I just can't find anybody because my family's been, on both sides of my family, in America for so long,
very, very
since
long time.
before America was an official country. So I don't know. And I don't know. I would love to find out the clan name so I could find out my tartan. I would give anything for that.
I was just thinking, if when the clan stuff started, is that when the family tartans came along? That,
Good question.
what if that kind of coincided?
Let us know.
If anyone knows.
The Stuart dynasty ruled Scotland during this time. Mary, Queen of Scots, was such a Stuart, and her reign of the mid-16th century, and life in general, is one of the more famous tragedies in European history.
I never heard of the Stuart dynasty, though.
A staunch Roman Catholic, she became at odds with her subjects following the Scottish Reformation in the early 16th century that strongly leaned toward a Low Church form of Presbyterian Protestantism that put God and the Bible above the authority of earthly rulers. After suspicion that she was involved in the murder of her first husband, she was forced to abdicate following an uprising and fled south, seeking the protection of her cousin, Elizabeth I of England, leaving her 1-year-old son James to become king, James VI. But Elizabeth, a staunch Protestant and target of various plots by the papacy and Catholic monarchs across Europe, saw Mary as a potential threat to her own rule, especially as Mary could claim lineage to the English throne through her great-grandfather, Henry VII.
Or have her poisoned?
Elizabeth's spymaster, Lord Walsingham, entrapped her into a plot against Elizabeth, and she was executed in 1587.
I thought she was poisoned.
But Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, died without an heir. James, Mary's son, was in fact the closest in line to the succession of the English crown, and so it was that James VI of Scotland then also became James I of England in 1603.
I didn't know it was the same person.
Yeah, I didn't realize that.
I'm freaking out.
I know. I'm glad we're doing this so we can get more in depth and get this information.
You know my obsession with Elizabeth I. I don't know if you guys know it.
Yes.
But like the movie with Cate Blanchett, Elizabeth from 1998. I've seen that movie a gajillion times. It was like it used to be my favorite movie ever. They never got to this part. Right? But I did not know.
No.
That was the same James.
I always have a hard time putting all the history together.
This is what is so.
But this is
this is what's so great is putting the puzzle pieces in the puzzle and getting it. It's like, oh, okay, this is fascinating to me. I'm sorry if this is annoying anybody, but I think this is awesome. I had no clue.
Definitely.
Wow. Okay.
In what would be a personal union of two crowns over two sovereign nations, each maintaining their own parliaments and jurisdictions.
This is fascinating.
Throughout the 17th century, attempts were made at various different times by both parliaments to unify the two states into one, but all failed.
Oh, also, this is when we have, remember, the 5th of November.
Oh, yes.
The gunpowder plot. That's occurred during his reign. Y'all have taught me some stuff.
You're definitely learning.
I am learning. And it's so cool.
It was actually a change in the climate that would, strangely, finally bring together England and Scotland into the Union of Great Britain.
Okay. Talk to me.
The 1690s saw cooler conditions across Europe, and it is confirmed today to have been the coldest decade in Scotland in 750 years. This led to a series of failed harvests and famine that wiped out as much as 10 to 15% of the population.
Now, hold on. I'm sorry again to pause again so quickly, but this would have been more than likely that time period, my ancestors that came to America, that made Natasha, would have come or already been here by now.
Yeah.
Would have just left or just been on their way. So this is interesting.
And that would make reason as to why they would have left.
Maybe. Now, maybe. I could be completely wrong on that, but the time frame that I've tracked my family into, still being in this country, they were still in America in the 1600s.
Yes.
At least on my dad's side. So this is something I have a lot personal attachment to, and I find this interesting. So just rewind that back here.
Just 10 to 15% of the population.
I'm sorry.
What
one more time.
Wiped years. This led to a series of failed harvests and famine that wiped out as much as 10 to 15% of the population. What became known as the 7 Lean Years led to many seeking an escape and emigration to other shores.
There you go.
Such an impulse spawned the Darien Scheme, a plan that would set up a Scottish colony upon the Isthmus of Panama.
Did we just find out maybe like when and how my ancestors may have came here?
Yeah. We might have.
We might have. We really might have. Because by my research and what's happening here in the timeline, it adds up.
Yes. I mean, you always wonder, why did they leave their country to go to a new land?
Right.
And this would be a good reason.
What? Guys, I'm kind of freaking out, I'm not gonna lie.
That would transport goods from Europe to the East Indies across that narrow strip of land, thus saving weeks or months of journey time, and more importantly, giving the Scots some independence from the English, who were otherwise dominating the trade routes to the colonies and East Asia, and leaving Scotland economically isolated. The plan received the financial backing of almost all the landowning elites of Scotland, and saw as much as 20% of the entire Scottish economy invested into it.
Wow.
But climate
That's
would
huge.
once again be the enemy of the Scots, for Panama was in a tropical climate that bred disease, and the site itself was poorly chosen, being swampy and prone to mosquitoes. On top of all that, such land was claimed by the Spanish crown, and had the colony persisted would have surely led to Spain stepping in. For all these reasons, it was doomed to failure, and fail it did, with most of the colonists dying of disease between 1699 and 1700.
Wow.
Its failure brought the country to economic ruin, and desperate, the Scottish elites sought help from England to stabilise the situation and pay off the crippling national debt.
Okay.
Additionally, many of the elites now saw that the only way to partake in the great wealth of the expansion of European trade with Asia was in a union with England.
Right, okay.
In 1707, after both parliaments of England and Scotland ratified terms in their own respective Acts of Union, the Scottish Parliament dissolved itself, with Scottish MPs henceforward sitting with English MPs in Westminster, London.
Makes sense.
The two nations became one. Great Britain was born.
Yeah, it was.
The Scottish elites got what they wanted. Debts were paid off in the short term,
Wow.
but more importantly, in the long term, they were able to take full advantage under equal terms of the English, now British, trade network, and the economy flourished. And in this, the 18th century, the age of enlightenment of new ideas in philosophy, science, engineering, architecture, and the arts was spreading across Europe.
Sorry, you just know how you just showed the flags come together and like the beginning of Great Britain or whatever. If you think about it, we think of it being so much older.
Yes.
You know, it's not.
No.
Not that much older than us. Great Britain itself,
Right.
is what I'm referring to.
Right.
And the United Kingdom itself, you know, adding in Northern Ireland too. I'm just saying, not that much
that is
older.
true.
I mean, we're thinking back, you know, thousands of years.
Yeah.
No.
I get
No.
what you're saying, yeah.
So I just found that interesting. I'm like, hold on a minute.
We do think of it as being there since like 500.
I mean, of course, and that's the thing. Like,
And of
people are
course
like,
it's been there,
yeah.
just not in the same capacity that it is.
That got you too, didn't it?
It did.
Philosophy, science, engineering, architecture, and the arts was spreading across Europe. When it reached Scotland, its flame burned very brightly with the advent of the Scottish Enlightenment. So many ideas and inventions came out of this period that have affected the greater world today
We
that
haven't
to
seen
list
that.
them all would be beyond the scope of this presentation.
We need to look at that.
Adam Smith's treatise on economics, The Wealth of Nations, is considered to be the foundation work on the subject of free trade and free market economics in a world that hitherto had been locked in mercantilism, guilds, and protected markets. The Encyclopaedia Britannica was conceived of and first published in Edinburgh.
Oh,
Really?
wow.
Scott James Watt developed the first compact, viable steam engine that would power the Industrial Revolution,
Didn't know that.
and is
No.
one of the most important inventions in global history,
Yeah.
changing the world forever.
Absolutely.
The Scottish Enlightenment was centred around Edinburgh, and the development of the new town of Georgian and neoclassical buildings to the north of the overcrowded old town that had been crammed onto the Royal Mile, a narrow hill that rises gently to its peak at Edinburgh Castle.
Okay.
With this combination of architecture and ideas, the city earned the nickname Athens of the North.
Oh.
But not everyone was happy with this new arrangement with England, particularly the Highlanders, who saw little in common with the Lowlanders, not to mention the true Sassenachs of England. Such sentiments came to a head when Charles Edward Stuart, aka Bonnie Prince Charlie, landed in Scotland in 1745.
Is that pretty Prince Charlie?
He was the descendant of King James II, last of the originally Scottish Stuart dynasty, who'd been ousted in the Glorious Revolution of 1688 for his staunch Catholic views in a nation now largely Protestant. Charles gathered an army in Scotland with the intent of marching on London and seizing the crown. He successfully united both Highlanders and Lowlanders dissatisfied with what they saw as rule from London in what became known as the Jacobite Rising of 1745. The army met with initial success, defeating British forces at Preston Pans just outside Edinburgh, then marched on England, reaching as far as Derby, since most of the British army was abroad fighting colonial wars.
I was going to say, how'd they get the fire?
But lack of support among the French and English for a restoration of the Stuart dynasty forced Charles to retreat with his army to Scotland. Retribution by the British came next year, with forces hurriedly shipped back from the various parts of the empire. Charles was finally defeated at Culloden in April 1746, a place marked forever in Scottish and English history as the last land battle ever fought in Great Britain, and the day that saw Scottish and particularly Highlander independence firmly crushed.
Yeah, I would say.
The Highland clearances that occurred in the following decades saw much of the Highlander way of life disrupted as tenants were forced off their land and the clan system purposefully weakened in a series of laws.
Okay.
Scotland was front and centre in the Industrial Revolution that had begun in England. Glasgow became a hive of industry, particularly in shipbuilding centred on the River Clyde, and was regarded as the second city of empire. So many ships of historical importance were built here, including the Cutty Sark, one of the fastest large commercial sailing ships, the Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth liners, of which the latter was the largest at that time, HMS Hood, the largest battleship built at that time, tragically sunk in 1941 with almost all hands lost, and the Royal Yacht Britannia, that served as the royal family's official ship for the latter half of the 20th century.
That's cool.
That's amazing.
But a combination of rapidly expanding population combined with the Highland clearances and other changes to the ownership of agricultural land led to a swollen population of urban poor, especially in Glasgow, that at one time had the largest slums in Europe.
Really?
Emigration was seen...
You know, it doesn't seem to matter what nation or country you're talking about. As times change and try to advance and move forward with different inventions and revolution, just trying to progress, there's always that fight back by part of the people. And it depends on how you look at the history, as whether you're saying, oh, the future and everything's going great. And then you look back at the other people that are resisting and they're not getting their needs met and they're suffering for the progression and things. So it's really neat how this is showing us both sides of that.
I agree.
And I really like that.
Well said.
time had the largest slums in Europe.
Now that's like shocking.
Emigration was seen as a way out of this hell, and between 1841 and 1931,
my family was
up
way
to
here.
2 million Scots left for North America, Australia and New Zealand, while almost another million relocated to England.
Oh.
Really?
Centuries earlier, during the Irish Wars of the 17th century, many Presbyterian Scots were offered land in Northern Ireland in what was known as the Ulster Plantation. Their descendants form the bulk of the Protestant population of that part of Ireland today, and without their strong unionist ties to Great Britain, Northern Ireland would not be part of the United Kingdom today.
Okay.
Yeah, that's making more sense now.
Puzzle pieces that we didn't know. Man, we have like this whole border thing going on, you know?
Yep.
And like none of the middle is filled out yet.
Right.
And we've been doing this for a good moment now. Yet you think you know stuff, and we watch a video like this, and yeah, I didn't know as much as I thought I did. But it's also connecting the dots too. So this is really interesting, and I'm seeing that red hand. I know what that is. Let me just rewind that just a little bit so I didn't miss anything from that. But this is fascinating.
Great Britain, Northern Ireland would not be part of the United Kingdom today. The union with England continued to flourish in the British Empire that reached its height in the latter half of the 19th century, ruling a quarter of the world's population. Scottish regiments within the British Army saw action in most colonial wars and in both world wars. Scots were considered to have equal opportunities within this system, with many Scots rising to the top of the ladder within the British Empire, including 7 prime ministers and a number of army chiefs, including Field Marshal Douglas Haig, who some called Butcher Haig for sending so many British infantry to their deaths in the trenches of World War I. Scotland's extensive coastline, in combination with its prodigious shipbuilding industry, proved to be vital components in the naval warfare during both World Wars, and even today Scotland is host to the base for Britain's submarine nuclear arsenal on the River Clyde. But in the 20th century, all was not well on the domestic front. The urban poor faced dreadful conditions in a climate of economic stagnation. The extensive slums of Glasgow were ultimately cleared, being replaced by sterile government-run housing estates on a scale not seen in any other British city. Scottish coal mines were facing exhaustion after more than a century of exploitation. Declining real wages in the inflation-scourged era of the 60s and 70s, as well as a decline in orders for steel and shipbuilding through increased competition from abroad, led to mass layoffs and an endless number of industrial disputes.
Jeez. Didn't know any of this.
These issues, among others, such as the discovery of oil in the North Sea east of Scotland, led to a revival of Scottish nationalism in the 1970s, with the Scottish National Party winning seats in Parliament in London, giving a political voice to an increasingly large number of Scots who sought independence or at least some form of greater autonomy for Scotland. After a 1997 referendum, Scotland was given more powers for self-governance, with the 1999 return of the Scottish Parliament after a hiatus of 292 years.
Wow.
A referendum for full independence from Britain as a nation-state was held in 2014, but was defeated by a margin of 55 to 45%. Polling up to the current day remains close, and the issue...
Where is that?
I know, I don't recognize that bridge.
Can someone let us know?
Up to 45%. Polling up to the current day remains close, and the issue of whether the country should remain a partner within the United Kingdom or become once more an independent Scotland is one of the key subjects of British politics today.
Okay. Wow. How many times have I done this by accident?
Only a handful, luckily.
That ended abruptly in a way that I'm like, oh, come on,
that
man.
Did.
Why'd you leave it like that? No opinion?
Yeah, I was going to say one thing I can say is...
Nothing.
We don't really have an opinion.
Nope. Not going down that rabbit hole of getting ourselves in some
We don't have
trouble.
enough information on it to give one, so we're going to stay out of that.
We're staying out of that. Just if you just discuss it in the comments, just be respectful to each other's opinions, please. That's all we ask. I thought this was awesome. Amazing. Great. Yeah. Sorry, I had a bunch more add to this.
No, that's great. It was amazing, and thank you for helping me put everything together.
I don't know that I did so much.
I think you did. You helped point out things that maybe I wasn't totally grasping on, because there's a lot of information there, and
I felt like this one was one of my favorites as far as any history video we've done, because this channel or this guy, whoever it was, they didn't overdo it and talk too fast and show too much at once. And I feel like a lot of the stuff we watch does that. This one was much more simple. So I'm like, I really feel like I did, my sponginess in my brain was actually grabbing the stuff that time. Yeah. More so.
I just learned more by one, watching and then writing and reading. And
true.
I don't always get it just from visually and hearing stuff.
I thought they put a lot of information in a very good amount of, like a good amount of time. Like it wasn't just like overly done. It wasn't too little. Now, there is a part 2.
There is.
Depending on how well this video does. And if you want us to, we will look up look at part 2 with you. If not, I'm definitely looking at it without you.
Definitely on our own for sure.
Please do speak up and let us know in the comments if you want us to do part 2, and we'll give it a thought. And if I can hold off, because I really want to watch it now. I won't watch it now. I'll wait for you guys. But I thought it was great. All the Scottish friends watching, please say hello and let us know what you thought of this. All the people who are not Scottish. You know, whether you're from England or you're from America, from Australia, you know, let us know your thoughts on it.
And let us know if you've learned anything.
Yes.
If you picked on something maybe that you weren't clear about, maybe it cleared it up a little bit more for you.
Or you thought they did a good job. We don't know. You tell us. I thought it was really cool. But I really did enjoy this, and I appreciate you guys watching with us. You know, I take everything we do very seriously, but this one was a lot more personal today. We will see you guys back here in just a couple days. But until then, as always, please love like jazz.
Be as strong as Tyson.
Thank you so much, guys.
Bye.
Bye.